Jed Drenning there?
I
You got
think we
it?
do. I hear
Okay.
you. You heard me. Now I hear you. So
Yeah, we
that's
did.
what we need.
What is the pulse, the excitement level with Rich Rod back?
Oh, there's a vibe. He was just at the basketball game the other day and went out on the floor with the entire staff and spoke for a few minutes. Got some loud cheers. Of course, he, said it's 206 days until we play Pitt. That got a loud cheer. But yeah, there's an excitement. I mean, right now the roster is obviously in transition's an understatement. But this is a guy who's been through this before. Even as recently as last year at Jacksonville State, Coach Rod had 60 new players, 40 new players after spring ball. So we added 26, 27, give or take, since he got here, if you want to count the recruiting class. And I would say that April portal window is going to be pretty meaningful too. We have spring ball earlier than we ever have. So that kind of lines us up and puts us in a position of leverage to get everything in our sights and get ready for that, because it's April 5th. So we have about 10 days to get ready for that. But something tells me this roster will be put together even through the course of parts of the summer when we're into OTAs.
Jed, they are getting a ton of new players. Which players do you think that are returning fit the system, especially offensively, that he's going to run better? Because it will be different than N.I.L Brown's a little bit. Maybe a lot of it.
Yeah, it will. Again, I always try and stress to people, look, all spreads aren't created equally. There's two very obvious, not just branches to the spread offense, but different trees. N.I.L came from the air raid tree with Hal Mummy and Mike Leach and on down the line. Rich doesn't come from the air raid. What we came from was the run and shoot. Everything we did was a predicate of the old Mouse Davis run and shoot. When we first installed this at Glenville State College in 1991, we were watching Jim Kelly, Houston Gamblers tape, Warren Moon with Jack Pardee and the Oilers back in the 80s. So it was tried and true run and shoot, much different than the air raid. Then over the arc of time, what he did was he kind of made it his own with different protections, different elements of the run game, different sight adjustments, different hot reads. So it is much different. But to answer your question, I'd start with the quarterback room. The guy we have returning, because that's what you asked, is Nico Marchiol. Nico had a couple starts last year. In effect, he's had 4 starts, even though he got in a couple snaps after the start of the backyard brawl a couple years ago. We kind of count that as a start. He's 4-0 in those games in which he's played his most meaningful football. Nico is tougher than a $2 steak. That's something that's going to appeal to Coach Rodriguez. He wants toughness out of that position. He wants intelligence and decisiveness out of that position. So in that respect, I think Nico is a good fit. And if you're asking yourself, well, what about the run game piece of it? Well, quarterbacks in Rich's system, in the modern version of his system, I sure wasn't one of these guys running the football. That's back when we were throwing it 50 times a game. Mm-hmm. But in the modern version of the system, even when you look at Tyler Huff last year at Jack State, he was a 4.7 kid, but he was just not just a willing runner, but an able runner, very physical, willing to stick his head in there and go into the briar patch and get the extra yard. Everybody doesn't have to be a Pat White. And when you look at what Nico Marchiol has done as a runner, the run that Mountaineer fans still talk about, the run that he made against Oklahoma State and showed his physicality. But I think he'll be a nice fit as a piece of the run game. But then we've added some pieces in that room. And then, of course, you go to Jaheim White. I think Jaheim White, when you look at his skill set, he has the twitch, but more importantly, he has the vision to be a very solid zone runner. We ran a lot of that with N.I.L as well. We ran a lot of the stretch play. And the stretch play is Coach Rod's bread and butter, the outside zone. So I do think that Jaheim has the skill set to do that. Again, we've added a couple other pieces, plus we have a couple freshmen that were untested last year. So that room's not necessarily in a bad spot. The question becomes, what does it look like up front at the point of attack? Basically, we lost all 5 starters, most of our 2 deep, either to the portal or graduation. Wyatt Milam's going to be off to the NFL draft as a stud at left tackle. But Landon Livingston's returning right now, running with the ones at center. But we've had to dip into the portal there. We've got a new offensive line coach, obviously, in Jack McNell. See how that all pieces together. But on the defensive side, anybody's guess. We're looking at 11 new starters. And Zach Alley has said, I'm not so sure I can articulate who those starters might be until the Friday night before the opener on that Saturday against Robert Morris. So that's kind of where we're at. It's like I said, massive transition.
Jed, going back to that running game, what did you think about the loss of Coach Chad Scott to Texas, and how do you think they go about replacing him, and just what do you think are the effects of that particular move?
Well, the downside is Chad's a good coach, and he's a good recruiter, and the kids in the room really love him. I mean, what he does is he forges genuine relationships that are beyond football with those kids in a very meaningful way, and so Texas is getting a good one. There's no doubt about that. But the upside to it is that's now somewhat of a coveted job. You have a team in transition with a new staff and an excitement and an energy around the program. So a full-time job coaching any room, especially a room with basically, if you look at the track record of what Rich has done with all the different 1,000-yard backs, 300-yard rushing efforts, 200-yard rushing efforts, that position is probably more consistently produced throughout the duration of his career than maybe even the quarterback spot at every place he's been. So whoever lands in that room as that next coach is going to be in a pretty good spot in terms of what they're going to be asked to do within the confines of Rich's offense.
When you watch him and what he does, and of course you've been there when he was there, you know all about him, but does he command the room differently than others you've had recently, Neil Brown, et cetera?
Yeah, different. It is different. I'm the last guy who's going to cast aspersions at Neil Brown. I think he built a very stable foundation here at West Virginia. What Rich does is different in the sense that he uses the phrase hard edge. And that's not just a talking point. It's really a way of life. And what you're getting with Rich Rodriguez, my podcast partner, Owen Schmidt, has said, you're not getting a coach, you're getting a program. That's what you're hiring. You're hiring an entire program and a culture and a style of play and a certain element of toughness. And that grind is going to continue way outside the lines. Everything you go about your business doing is going to be different. There is a very heavy level of discipline, on down to the tiny little things that you wouldn't expect. Your shoes have to be the same color. Your socks have to be the same color. All these little things in the off season don't seem to matter. That's stacking pennies because those little things do add up and they do matter. And he prides himself. All three phases of the game are going to be defined by their toughness. And he always says, look, the average fan sitting in the stands, they might not understand or be advanced enough to appreciate the X's and O's, what you do right, what you do wrong. But you know what they do get right? What the average blue collar fan, all of them, what they do get right, what they can easily tell, if you're playing hard. If you're playing hard, fans know, fans can tell, and fans appreciate that. And that really resonates with them. And as a guy who grew up in Granttown, West Virginia, he understands the culture of the program. He understands the meaning of that toughness and just how much it does mean to the fan base. And I think that's what you're going to get. You're going to get a hardworking group that does have that hard edge, that's going to play with a certain element of toughness. And if you want to smack them in the mouth, you better be ready to get smacked back because they're not going to back off. And that's just the approach that he's taken ever since I've known him. I first met him when I was a junior in high school, and he was a 23-year-old assistant at Salem College living with Lonnie Warwick. May he, rest in peace. He's another West Virginia legend, a former member of the Minnesota Vikings back in the fearsome foursome days. But even back then, Rich had this edge to him that just set him apart. If you sat down for more than a few minutes and had a conversation with him, you quickly picked up on the fact this is an intense dude, and it's an infectious intensity, and it rubs off on those around him, not just the players, but the staff, or even, those working in the building. They all understand what this culture is, or they're not going to be part of it. And that's just how this is going to work.
So Pat White's on the staff now, yep. And I don't you couldn't even tell me what he was going to do, and I would tell you that's a great idea, just to remind people, hey, this dude was here, and it is possible to have these kind of guys, because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, there have been some good stretches, but his era was the last stretch where it felt like West Virginia could be a player on the national scene year in and year out and get guys like Pat White, because they had Pat and Noel Devine and Slayton and all those guys that were just so good.
To be your best requires commitment, dedication, and intensity. It's what defines elite athletes and inspires Airwave to find new ways to optimize your performance. Introducing Airwave Recovery, a mouthpiece designed to work while you sleep to further unlock your potential. Airwave Recovery features our patented reflex technology. Small, integrated bumps uniquely positioned to activate your tongue's natural response. Your tongue will instinctively move forward, opening your airway and improving your quality of sleep. And thanks to our patented fitting material and a purpose-designed support wall, you'll enjoy a secure, comfortable fit all night long. With Airwave Recovery, you sleep better and recharge faster. Airwave Recovery, recharge your potential.
Yeah, we've won BCS bowls since then. The Orange Bowl with Dana was since then. But you're right in the sense that when it came to the conversation about who's going to be left standing, that last handful of brands at the end of the season to talk national championship possibilities, that was the last time in Morgantown. And, the thing about it is, I think it speaks to a lot. Now, I'll get to Pat in a minute, but even before Pat, what a lot of people fail to recognize is we're trying to be giant slayers. That's what West Virginia's always tried to do. For 100 years, we overachieved. And in college football 1.0, that's what made us who we were, winning more games than we should, knocking off some of these blue bloods, producing more kids after developing them for 4 to 5 years that get into the NFL draft, way more than we ever should in a state with a population of 1.8 million. And that's what made us who we were. But when you look right before Pat White got here, Rasheed Marshall graduated with more wins against ranked football teams than any starting quarterback in the history of West Virginia football, which was also under Rich Rodriguez. So it was getting amped up with Rasheed and Quincy Wilson and that crew. And then by the time you mentioned Steve and Owen and Pat, by the time they got up and running, it was really humming. And Noel Devine comes in. Noel Devine's now back on staff. And Rich has said, look, I didn't bring these guys back just because they're former players and they remind us of how great we used to be. I brought them back because of what they offer as coaches today. They can help us win. And that's true of Pat. He has the it factor. Any room that he steps into, he's going to command everybody's attention. His reputation precedes him. And for that matter, it's pretty cool for young running backs. There's a lot of players that I would say when Noel played 15, 20 years ago, for the modern player, most of those guys are forgotten. But you know what? When you become a YouTube phenom, like Noel Devine did before he even arrived in Morgantown when he was playing high school ball in Florida, for some reason, those things live forever in perpetuity on the internet. And those young kids still know who Noel Devine is. Those young kids still know who Pat White is in large measure because of the video games, the EA Sports part of it. So it's pretty cool. And it's nice to have guys like that back around, pitching in and playing key roles in what we're trying to build here.
So, Jed, with those guys back around the program or in certain positions and just kind of the feeling of having some of the legends be so excited, the excitement of the fans, just to have a change that was, you could feel it building, the need for change, and that's why they eventually made a change. But to bring back Rich Rod and all those warm and fuzzy memories, what's the excitement level, the anticipation level? I mean, let's face it, we've talked to you a few times, like West Virginia's had some big wins and they've had a nice season and whatnot, but it's always kind of been this feeling of, feels like you guys have wanted more and felt as though there should be more, and now it's kind of pointing in the direction of this is what can provide that. So it just seems like there's just a different feel around the fan base. Would I be correct in saying that? And could you kind of describe what that feeling's like?
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. What happened was N.I.L was hired in 2019 and charged with a massive rebuild. In the midst of that rebuild, here came COVID, here came N.I.L, here came the portal. The landscape of the game completely shifted. Well, now it's shifting again, but maybe this time around it's shifting a little bit in our direction. Now, here's what I mean by that. Not only is it a great time for a new hire in the sense that it's a fresh start, our scheduling model is going to change. West Virginia for 4 straight years was the only team in the country, I should say, that 4 straight years played 11 power conference schools. I'm not so sure what the wisdom behind that might have been, but now what we're going to do is do what the rest of the Big 12 and the rest of college football do. Starting next year, we're moving into a model where our non-conference league games, those 3 games, we have 1 G5, 1 power conference, which is a rival in Pitt, and then 1 FCS, just like everybody else does. I try to explain to people, look, our 6-6 is everybody else's 7-5 in the Big 12. Well, now we're getting the same scheduling model they have. So that in and of itself is going to help. And now we're going from a rule that was governed and dictated almost strictly by NIL and NIL only. Did you have the funds or didn't you? If not, then a head coach is tasked with going out and trying to beat a team with a roster that was paid 2 or 3 times what yours was. Well, the landscape, as you guys know, and I'm sure you've covered at length, is about to change in very significant ways with this House decision starting July 1st. You're going to go from a strictly NIL model to a revenue share model. And what that can mean for West Virginia is instead of placing in the bottom quarter of the Big 12 an NIL revenue, which we have to offer and compose our roster, now I'd say we could get probably into the middle of the pack from a rev share standpoint, because maybe even a little more, because Ren Baker has strategized and planned for a while at how to get there. And he is convinced we're going to get to that full share, that 22% share, which depending on who you ask is going to be between 20 and 22 million. And I'm not so sure that everybody in the Big 12 will have that. I'm not so sure that everybody in college football will have that. So if you can at least get to the middle of the pack, if you can get more, even better. But the middle of the pack gives you a puncher's chance that in the bottom quarter you didn't have really. So you can only punch up so much. And I think it's changing with the new staff right in time for that as well. So all these things might be breaking our way, and it could signal good news and, a bright future for West Virginia in the next handful of years.
You mentioned your podcast partner, Owen Schmidt, a former maybe you're never a former fullback. Jed, do you think that he can get Rich Rod to throw the fullback back into the offense?
I'll tell you what, it won't take much talking. Because that style of play definitely appeals to Coach Rod. There's no doubt about that. And what Rich is going to do is he's also going to cater to the strength of the personnel that he has. If he can find a fullback, he'll absolutely utilize one. But, even when you look at what he did last year at Jack State, those two cats between Trey Stewart at running back, and we already mentioned the quarterback, they're the first tandem in the history of FBS football to have 1,500 plus or 1,300 plus yards each and 15 touchdowns. Nobody's ever done that. I could go through a long list of things that were firsts under the watchful eye of Rich Rodriguez as an offensive play caller. And he's been transcendental in terms of the role that he's played really throughout modern college football. A lot of what he's done has become mainstream. So he continues to study, try to evolve, and he's going to utilize whatever he has. But if you get him a fullback that's half of what Owen Smith was, I'll promise you're going to start to see some pro personnel in there. You're going to start to see some fullback when they go max and have those two backs in the backfield. One of them's going to be the big boy, just like it used to be with Owen. It used to be Owen and Steve Slayton or Owen and Noel Devine. Rich would not be reluctant to that whatsoever. He is eager to go downhill and smack you around. So good question, and I think I could easily see that happen.
Jed, last question. It's basketball. I saw West Virginia. They were playing Baylor, in fact, last Saturday. And, of course, the game went into overtime. And they had a chance, and I've seen them play there a couple of times when they probably should have closed the game out but didn't. They have Tech on the road tomorrow. We know exactly how good Grant McCaslin and company are. They're in that 16-10, just under 500 in the conference. What do they need to do, in your opinion, to be able to be tournament bound to close this out?
Well, now you got me way out of my element. You need to be asking Caridi. Okay,
yeah.
But to be honest with you, what I'd start with is you got to start hitting some free throws, because over the last stretch of games, and I've seen Tony talk about this, one of the things we've been afflicted with is not only are we just stone cold at the free throw line, but the opposition's been scorching hot. That's been the difference in a lot of these close games, and you have to find ways to finish it out. And the only way to finish it out is to set yourself up for a better opportunity to finish it out with those opportunities for those charity stripe points. But I think at the end of the day, when you look at this, the restructuring of this roster, because again, if you look at what it was that Coach DeVries inherited, if not for the portal, you're looking at a setback that takes 3 to 5 years to rebuild this thing, really. And out of the gates, he pulled all these major upsets. He was stunning the world. 3 massive wins that nobody saw coming, and put together with a roster that was glued together like a ransom note in large measure on short notice, all through the portal. And you could argue that we've been for the better part of the season without our best player, his kid. So we're regarded, depending on who you ask right now, as a bubble-ish kind of team. But yeah, if you start hitting free throws, we don't have those big guys inside that some of these teams at the top of the Big 12 might have. He's going to work towards getting some of those types of guys, but set the table with that and then hope for the best.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it, Jed. Great to see you.
Absolutely.
Have a great weekend. Jed Drenning, West Virginia football sideline analyst with us.